I ate it for canceling my husband's credit card privileges after he spent thousands on a friend, who happens to be a younger woman. From the very beginning, it was clear that our financial dynamic was a little unbalanced. I was always the one who had steady work, moving up steadily in my career, while my husband, Dean, struggled to find his footing. He had talent, ambition, and big dreams, but his luck in the job market had been spotty at best. Layoffs, startups that never took off, and a string of contract gigs had become the norm for him. And over time, I became the main provider for our household. I never minded it, though. I believed in him, in his potential, and I wanted to be supportive. We were a team, after all, or so I thought. After a while, though, it became clear that his bad luck with work wasn't just a phase. When he struggled to get his credit back on track, I agreed to let him use my credit card, thinking it might help him rebuild and feel empowered. Besides, it wasn't supposed to be for personal use. He was only going to use it for work-related expenses. We'd agreed on that. Things like career networking, lunches with potential clients, and any professional development opportunities that might come up. It made sense to me at the time, and I liked the idea that he had my support to help him grow. We'd been following this arrangement for a few years, and it seemed to be working. Or so I thought. Dean always came across as responsible. He would say things like, "Thanks for helping me out, it's all for us." You know? But there were little moments, tiny flickers, that made me wonder. Occasionally, I'd see him come home with new clothes or gadgets, things that seemed a little indulgent for someone in his financial position. And I'd wonder if maybe he was using the card to treat himself. I brushed it off, reminding myself that I had given him permission to use it for networking and career-related expenses. And I didn't want to control every little thing he did. I wanted to trust him. But then, a few weeks ago, I noticed a charge that didn't quite sit right. It was for an upscale boutique that I'd never visited. The type of place where people go when they're looking to splurge. Not where you pick up anything remotely work-related. I told myself that it was just one charge. Maybe a gift for a client or something equally business-minded. But then I looked a little deeper, and I started to see a pattern, a series of unusually high charges that didn't add up. Luxury dinners at restaurants we'd never gone to together. Spa visits. Even a weekend hotel stay. I stared at the list, scrolling through charge after charge, my stomach sinking. These weren't just work expenses. They were the kind of splurges that screamed indulgence. A level of spending I would never have expected from him. I felt a little twinge of guilt, wondering if maybe I had missed the signs. But I pushed the feeling down, reminding myself that maybe he was planning something for me. A surprise. But that hope was short-lived. The next time I casually brought up the card, something I thought he'd shrug off with a smile and maybe a hint about what he was planning, he got defensive. His whole demeanor shifted, a tension settling over him as he told me that his spending was none of my business, and that it was part of his professional network investment. I was stunned. We'd always been open about finances. I thought I'd given him the freedom to use my card to support him. But his sudden defensiveness felt like a wall being thrown up between us. That was when the real red flags started waving. I'd trusted him for years, even given him a sense of autonomy with my finances. Now, though, I could feel that trust beginning to unravel. The way he reacted, how guarded and dismissive he became, made me feel like I was prying into something I was supposed to stay out of. But it was my card, my hard-earned money being spent. I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in my gut, a sense of betrayal that gnawed at me the more I thought about it. I started looking back on other little things. The times he'd casually mentioned meeting up with a friend, or going out to network. Things I had brushed off before but that now felt suspiciously vague. The list of charges, each one a small reminder of a mystery I hadn't been aware of, felt like puzzle pieces slipping into place. And the picture they were forming was one I didn't want to see. It was hard to face the possibility that Dean might be hiding something from me. That he might not be the supportive partner I'd convinced myself he was. I thought about our early days. Back when his ambition was charming. Back when I thought he just needed someone to believe in him. And I'd tried to be that person. To be patient and supportive. But as I stared at the credit card statement in my hands, I felt like I was holding the remnants of a lie. A picture of a life I thought we were building together, but that was starting to feel like an illusion. As the suspicions grew, I started feeling like I was tiptoeing around him. Cautious, careful, waiting for another charge to show up or for him to give some kind of explanation that might make this all make sense. But nothing he said reassured me. And every new expense felt like one more piece of a trust that was beginning to fracture beyond repair. As the days went on, my unease only grew. Each time I glanced at the credit card statement, I'd find more purchases that didn't add up, each one making me feel like a stranger was living in my house. It was as if I was discovering an entirely different side of Dean. One I'd never seen and didn't recognize. My heart was racing whenever I thought about confronting him again. But his defensiveness from last time made me hesitate. I'd always trusted him, assumed the best intentions, yet here I was, sleuthing through statements, wondering if everything we'd built was slipping away. After a few days of wrestling with myself, I couldn't ignore the suspicions anymore. I decided to dig deeper, to see if there was something, anything, that would explain the disconnect between the man I thought I married and the man who was now spending my money on luxury restaurants and hotel rooms. It felt wrong, intrusive, but my gut told me I was justified. I needed answers, and if he wasn't going to give them to me, I would have to find them myself. It wasn't hard to piece things together once I got started. Dean had left his phone charging in the kitchen one night, and I couldn't resist. I told myself I'd just check for a few minutes, just to see if my suspicions were unfounded. But as I scrolled through his messages, my heart sank. There, in black and white, was everything I'd feared, maybe even worse. The texts were from a woman named Lily. She was 24, single, and had been showering him with compliments. Texting him things like, "I'm so impressed by you," and "Thank you for the beautiful dinner." I read line after line, each one pulling me further into a reality I didn't want to acknowledge. She wasn't just a friend, she was someone he'd been spending lavishly on. Someone who seemed all too comfortable accepting his generosity. And my credit card was footing the bill. But what truly crushed me were the promises he was making to her. In one text, he offered to take her shopping to help her with a few things. In another, he mentioned setting up a weekend trip, telling her it would be their little escape. The words felt like knives, each one cutting a little deeper than the last. Here he was, giving her a lifestyle that he could never afford on his own: spa visits, expensive dinners, high-end gifts, all under the pretense of helping her with her career. It was beyond belief. The man who couldn't even afford his own credit card was treating her like a queen. Using my income, my trust, to keep her around. It was as if everything I thought I knew about him, every reason I'd supported him through his career struggles, had been twisted into something dark and selfish. I could practically see it now. The charm, the flattery, the money, all used to fuel his ego, to make him feel important, maybe even needed. My head spun as I thought about the sacrifices I'd made for him over the years. The times I'd reassured him when he was discouraged. The ways I'd held things together financially because I believed in him. In us. And now he was spending my hard-earned money to make this young woman feel impressed by him. The sense of betrayal was suffocating. I felt as though I was drowning, trapped under the weight of my own foolishness for trusting him. How could he do this to me? I'd worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and he'd thrown it all away on some ridiculous attempt to play the wealthy benefactor to a girl barely out of college. I couldn't shake the image of him out on dates, ordering high-end wines, sitting across from her in restaurants we'd never even been to together, smiling and charming her with my money. I scrolled back through their texts, my eyes burning as I read more, each message driving home how carefully he'd kept this from me. He'd planned everything meticulously, right down to the work-related expenses that I'd unknowingly paid for. I could feel anger bubbling up, but beneath it was a wave of sadness, a quiet grief for the relationship I thought we had. When I looked at the charges again, I saw them differently. Each one wasn't just a purchase, it was a choice he'd made. A moment where he'd put her above me. The dinners, the gifts, the hotel stay, they were tokens of a betrayal I could never unsee. I thought about all the times he'd asked me to trust him, to believe in him, and now I realized that trust had been one-sided. He'd taken advantage of my faith in him, my willingness to support him, and twisted it to fit his needs, his desires. As I sat there, numb and staring at the messages, the truth became painfully clear. This wasn't about a business investment or a professional connection. It was about his ego, his need to feel important and admired, and he was willing to sacrifice our relationship and my financial security to achieve it. He was playing a role, one that he'd convinced himself was justifiable, one that made him feel powerful and successful, even if it was at my expense. That night, I felt like a stranger in my own life. The home we shared, the promises we'd made to each other, they all felt hollow, tainted by his actions. My trust in him had been like a bridge, built slowly over years, each plank laid carefully, reinforced by my faith in us. And now, it was as if he'd set that bridge on fire, watching it burn with barely a second thought. I knew I couldn't ignore this. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine, that these charges were anything but betrayal disguised as networking. I wanted to confront him, to scream, to demand an explanation that could somehow make this hurt less. But as I sat there, clutching the credit card statement and staring at the messages, I realized there was no explanation that would undo the damage. No words could make up for the choices he'd made, for the way he'd chosen her over me, time and time again. This wasn't just a financial betrayal, it was a betrayal of trust, of love, of the partnership I thought we had. And I wasn't sure if anything could ever rebuild what he'd so carelessly destroyed. The confrontation with Dean was inevitable, a storm brewing inside me that I knew I could no longer keep contained. For days, I had agonized over the receipts, the charges, the messages, all evidence that the man I had loved and supported had been leading a double life on my dime. When I finally confronted him, I wasn't even sure what I expected. An apology? An admission of guilt? Maybe some sign of remorse? But what I got was something else entirely. When I brought it up, I could tell he'd already prepared his defense. As I laid out the credit card statements and mentioned Lily's name, I could see the tension in his face. For a brief second, he looked nervous, almost as if he was worried I'd seen too much. But that flicker of vulnerability vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a mask of defiance that threw me off guard. "She's just a friend," he said, crossing his arms and giving me a look that seemed to challenge me to disagree. "She's been going through a rough time, and I wanted to help her out. It's called compassion. Maybe you should try it." Compassion. I stared at him, my mind racing. Compassion was not what I had seen in those texts. Compassion didn't look like expensive dinners, luxury gifts, or weekend hotel stays. Compassion didn't drain my credit card without a single word to me. But he seemed unfazed by my disbelief, as if my reaction was somehow overblown, a result of jealousy rather than betrayal. "It's part of my professional network investment," he continued, his tone dismissive. "I told you that. Building a career means meeting the right people, keeping them close, making sure they see me as someone willing to invest in them. This is how I'm building our future." He said the words so calmly, with such conviction, that for a fleeting moment, I almost doubted myself. Was I being unreasonable? Was I stifling his career potential by questioning these expenses? The way he spun it made it sound almost logical, as if investing in this young woman was somehow just another step in building a professional empire. But then I remembered the messages, the photos of dinners, the hints of a weekend trip. No amount of networking could justify that level of deception. "Still," he continued, spinning his justifications with the ease of someone who had already convinced himself that he was in the right. "It's not like I'm doing anything wrong," he insisted. "I'm helping someone. Why is that so hard for you to understand? Not everyone is as fortunate as you are." His words stung, more deeply than I wanted to admit. Not everyone is as fortunate as you are. Suddenly, he'd twisted it, positioning me as the one with the advantage, as if my hard work and financial stability were things I'd taken for granted. Things that he had graciously decided to overlook. And now, by questioning his actions, I was somehow betraying the very foundation of our relationship, the foundation I had, in fact, spent years supporting. When I pushed back, insisting that his relationship with this woman seemed far too intimate to be professional, he scoffed. "You're jealous," he said flatly, his voice cold and unyielding. "You can't stand the thought of me helping a younger woman. Someone who might actually look up to me for advice. For guidance. That's your problem, not mine." The accusation left me speechless. Jealous? After everything I'd seen, after all the trust he'd betrayed. He had the nerve to suggest that I was the problem, that my concerns, my anger, my feelings of betrayal were nothing more than jealousy. It was like he had taken all my emotions, all my hurt, and twisted it into something ugly. Something he could weaponize against me. "You're suffocating me," he went on, his tone sharp, almost accusing. "How am I supposed to get anywhere if you're constantly breathing down my neck? Checking up on every dollar I spend? I thought you wanted me to succeed. To rebuild my career. Or was that just something you said to make yourself feel better?" His words hit me like a slap. Each one calculated to undermine the sacrifices I'd made for him. I had spent years supporting him, putting his needs before my own, carrying the weight of our finances so he could focus on his career. And now he was accusing me of holding him back, of being the obstacle standing in the way of his success. It was as if he had rewritten our entire history, erasing all the support I'd given him and replacing it with this idea that I was nothing more than a jealous, overbearing wife. But despite the anger simmering inside me, there was a part of me that still clung to hope. A small voice that wanted to believe he could understand the damage he'd done. That he could see how much he'd hurt me. So I asked him, quietly, if he understood why I was upset. I tried to explain that this wasn't about jealousy, or control, or suffocating his ambitions. It was about trust. About the betrayal of knowing he'd used my hard-earned money to play the role of a benefactor to someone else, without a single thought for how it would affect me. But he didn't want to hear it. He brushed my words aside, rolling his eyes as if I were the one being unreasonable. "I'm doing this for us," he said, his voice dripping with exasperation. "Everything I'm doing is for our future. You're just too short-sighted to see it." I stared at him, feeling a mix of sadness and disbelief. In that moment, it became painfully clear that he had no intention of taking responsibility for his actions. He had convinced himself that he was the victim, that I was the one stifling him, standing in the way of his so-called success. No apology, no admission of guilt, just a string of justifications and accusations. Each one designed to make me feel small, to make me question my own reality. And maybe, in another moment, I might have let those doubts seep in. Maybe I would have second-guessed myself, wondering if I was, in fact, overreacting, if I was letting my emotions cloud my judgment. But as I looked at him, standing there with his arms crossed and that smug, unyielding expression on his face, something inside me snapped. Without another word, I walked over to my bag, pulled out my phone, and opened the app for my credit card. With a few taps, I canceled his access. I could see him watching me, his eyes narrowing as he realized what I was doing. But I didn't care. This was my money, my life, my choice. I had spent years supporting him, trusting him, giving him the benefit of the doubt. And now, in this moment, I knew I had to take back control. When I put my phone away, he glared at me, a mixture of shock and anger flashing across his face. "You're seriously doing this?" he said, his voice laced with disbelief. "You're cutting me off?" I met his gaze, my expression calm but resolute. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm cutting you off." For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of clarity, a quiet strength that had been buried under years of compromise and sacrifice. I knew he would see this as an overreaction, that he would spin it to his family, his friends, painting me as the controlling, unsupportive wife. But in that moment, I didn't care. I was done letting him take advantage of my trust, of my willingness to believe in him. As I turned to leave the room, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a freedom I hadn't felt in years. He could call me jealous, controlling, short-sighted, none of it mattered anymore. I was done with the lies, the manipulation, the games he'd played to keep me under his thumb. I was done being the one who sacrificed, the one who gave and gave, only to be told I wasn't enough. This was my life, my future, and I was finally ready to take it back. It didn't take long for the repercussions to start rolling in. I had barely slept since I cancelled his access to the credit card. My mind a whirlwind of anger, disappointment, and, yes, guilt. Part of me knew I'd made the right choice, but another part kept gnawing at me, making me wonder if I had been too harsh, too quick to cut him off without giving him a chance to redeem himself. But that hesitation was short-lived, as I soon found out that Dean hadn't just accepted the consequences quietly. He'd gone straight to his family, and I was quickly made to feel like the villain in a story I hadn't expected. The calls and texts started the very next day. His sister, who'd always looked at me with a critical eye, was the first to reach out. Her message was short, cutting straight to the heart of her disdain. Really? Canceling his card? That's a bit extreme, don't you think? I stared at the screen, feeling my stomach churn as I read her words, each one loaded with judgment. Before I could even process a response, I received a call from his mother. His mom's voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. She told me how concerned she was about my decision. About how it didn't seem fair to treat Dean that way. She emphasized that he was under a lot of pressure to get his career back on track and that I, as his wife, should be the one supporting him unconditionally. You know he's trying to build something for your future, don't you? She asked, her tone dripping with pity, as though I was some sort of obstacle standing in the way of Dean's greatness. It sounds like you don't believe in him anymore. I listened in silence, my heart pounding, caught between anger and a painful, creeping doubt. For years, I had believed in him, so much so that I'd poured my energy, my money, and my trust into supporting him. And now, because I dared to set boundaries, to finally protect myself, I was suddenly the one lacking faith. The irony of it was infuriating. Yet her words had a way of piercing through my defenses, making me question whether I'd been too harsh. But the final blow came when his cousin chimed in, tagging me in a lengthy social media post about spouses who don't support each other, and how cutting someone off financially is a form of control. I knew it was a thinly veiled message directed at me, and my heart sank as I read through the comments. Seeing people I'd known for years chime in, sharing their opinions on how sad it was to see a marriage fall apart over money. They didn't know the full story, of course. They only knew what Dean had told them. The version where he was a struggling man trying to do his best, held back by an overbearing wife who couldn't understand his ambition. The backlash left me feeling isolated, as if the ground I'd finally managed to stand on was slipping out from under me. I tried to tell myself that their opinions didn't matter, that they were only defending him because they didn't know the truth. But it was hard not to let it get to me. They were right about one thing. I had cut him off without a warning, without giving him the chance to explain further or to prove that he could change. Maybe I should have handled it differently, sat down with him to talk it through calmly. Maybe I had overreacted. But then, in those moments of doubt, I would remember the texts, the gifts, the expensive dinners he'd funded with my money. I'd remember the younger woman who'd received it all with a gratefulness that felt like a mockery of our marriage. And each time I thought of it, the doubt would dissipate, replaced by a cold certainty that I'd had every right to protect myself. To draw a line where he had so blatantly overstepped. The next few days were a roller coaster of emotions. Family members, both his and mine, kept reaching out, some siding with him, others with me. Even close friends, people I'd trusted for years, seemed to have their reservations, questioning whether I'd truly considered all sides of the story. A few suggested that maybe this was just a phase for him, that he'd been under stress and might have gotten caught up in the thrill of networking, without realizing the harm it caused. Their words planted new seeds of doubt, ones that seemed to take root no matter how hard I tried to pull them out. Was it possible that I was the one who'd misunderstood? That he was genuinely trying to build a future for us, even if his methods were flawed? Maybe I hadn't given him enough room to find his footing. Maybe he felt emasculated by my financial success and this was his misguided way of asserting his own worth. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that those were excuses. I had given him room, years of room. I had trusted him implicitly. offering my support and financial resources without hesitation. And he had taken advantage of that. Not to build a career. Not to create a future for us. But to live out some fantasy of being a benefactor to a younger woman. One who likely saw him as nothing more than a meal ticket. One night, after another round of accusatory messages from his family, I found myself sitting alone in our living room, scrolling through old photos of us. Memories of a time when I truly believed we were building something real together. It felt like I was looking at strangers. Two people who no longer existed. Swept away by lies, betrayal, and the slow decay of trust. I remembered the look on his face when I first confronted him. The anger, the condescension, the refusal to even acknowledge that he might have done something wrong. And with each memory, I felt the pieces of my doubts start to fall away, replaced by a painful clarity. I realized that the backlash from his family wasn't about me at all. It was about them clinging to their own illusions, their own ideals of loyalty and support, regardless of the cost. To them, Dean's actions didn't matter. What mattered was that I had dared to defy their image of a good wife. The kind who would stand by her husband no matter what. They didn't care that he had betrayed my trust or that he had used my money to fund a relationship with someone else. All they cared about was maintaining the status quo, keeping up appearances. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't let his family's judgment, or even my own doubts, sway me. I had given Dean every chance to prove himself, to be the partner I thought he could be. And he had thrown it away. Not just through his actions, but through his refusal to take responsibility, to see the hurt he had caused. I couldn't keep sacrificing my self-worth, my financial stability, just to satisfy the expectations of people who couldn't, or wouldn't, see the truth. In the end, I knew that taking back control of my finances, of my trust, was the only way forward. It didn't matter what his family thought, what excuses they tried to make for him, or what doubts they tried to plant in my mind. This was my life, my future, and I would no longer let it be defined by the choices of a man who had proven, time and time again, that he was willing to put himself first, regardless of the cost. The days that followed were difficult, but I held on to that clarity, that resolve, with everything I had. His family's opinions, their judgment, even the whispers among friends, they were just noise. Background distractions from the truth I'd finally found. I had done what was right for me. For my own sanity, my own well-being, and as painful as it was, I knew it was a decision I would never regret. In the quiet that followed the fallout, I found myself looking back at my marriage, replaying the years I'd spent with Dean through a new lens. It was strange, realizing how many moments I had glossed over. How many times I'd excused his actions or convinced myself they were temporary setbacks. I had wanted to believe in him so badly that I'd ignored all the small signs. Each one a tiny piece of a larger picture I was only now beginning to understand. Dean and I had met at a time when I was more optimistic. When I still believed that relationships were about lifting each other up. About support and loyalty. I remember feeling drawn to his charm. His ambition. The way he'd talk about his dreams as if they were just around the corner, waiting for him to reach out and grab them. He had big ideas, aspirations that seemed grand and daring. And I, in my own naivety, wanted to be the one to help him achieve them. In the early days, I was proud to support him. I thought that being there for him, covering for him financially when work didn't pan out, was an investment in our shared future. I'd tell myself that we were in this together, that his success would eventually be ours to share. But as the years wore on, I started to notice a pattern, one that at the time I didn't have the words to describe. It was subtle, a gradual shift from gratitude to expectation. Somewhere along the line, my support stopped being appreciated and became something he felt entitled to. Each time he'd lost a job or another opportunity fell through, he'd assure me that it was just a minor setback, that he was on the cusp of something great. And each time, I'd believe him, not because his words were convincing, but because I wanted to believe that the man I'd married was someone who would follow through on his promises. I'd tell myself that I was helping him build a future for us. A future that he assured me was worth the sacrifices I was making. But now, looking back, I could see that those assurances had been hollow, empty words designed to keep me in my place, to keep me from questioning whether I was giving more than I was getting. He hadn't been building a future for us, he had been keeping himself afloat. Using my faith in him as a safety net he could rely on without ever truly giving anything back. The truth was, I had been his safety net for years. And with each passing year, he'd pushed that line a little further, testing how much I was willing to sacrifice, how far he could stretch my trust. And I, blinded by love, by a belief in the potential I thought he had let him do it, convincing myself that it was only a matter of time before he proved himself. The revelation of his relationship with Lily had only been the final piece. The last act in a long play of manipulation. I realized that he had always known exactly how far he could push. That he'd tested my boundaries so carefully over the years that I hadn't even noticed them disappearing. My finances, my trust, even my self-worth had been slowly eroded. All for the sake of a man who had convinced himself that he was entitled to my sacrifices. And now, seeing it for what it was, I felt a mixture of anger and sadness that I could barely contain. I was angry at him for taking advantage of me, for using my love and loyalty as tools to fuel his own ego. But I was also angry at myself, for not seeing it sooner, for allowing myself to believe that my value was tied to what I could provide for him, to the stability I could bring to his chaotic life. In the days that followed, I found myself examining every moment, every decision I'd made in our marriage. I thought about the times I'd cut back on my own expenses, choosing to save so that he'd have room to explore his networking opportunities. I remembered the promotions I'd turned down because I didn't want him to feel overshadowed. The opportunities I'd passed on because I was so focused on helping him build his own career. Each memory was like a weight, pressing down on me as I realized just how much of myself I'd given up for the sake of his ambitions. But beneath the sadness and regret, there was a new understanding taking shape. A quiet clarity that I hadn't felt in years. I realized that my worth wasn't tied to him or to the life I tried to build around his dreams. I had spent so long trying to make him feel secure, to be the support system he needed, that I had lost sight of my own needs, my own ambitions. I had given so much that I'd forgotten how to stand on my own, how to prioritize my own happiness. This wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a betrayal of everything I had believed about myself and my place in this marriage. And with that realization came a sense of freedom. A quiet resolve that I didn't need to be his safety net anymore. I didn't need to be the one to hold him up, to make excuses for his failures, to sacrifice my own stability for a future he had no intention of sharing with me. For years, I'd allowed myself to believe that his dreams were my dreams, that his ambitions were worth sacrificing for. But now I saw that those dreams had always been his alone. That he had used my support, my sacrifices, to create a life that served him, not us. And as painful as it was to face, I knew that I couldn't keep living that way. In that quiet reflection, I realized that it was time to let go, to reclaim the parts of myself I had buried under years of compromise. I would no longer be the wife who sacrificed her own happiness for the sake of a man who saw her only as a means to an end. I would no longer be the woman who gave without receiving, who trusted without question, who allowed herself to be diminished in the name of loyalty. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that it was mine to shape, mine to define on my own terms. I didn't need Dean's validation, didn't need his dreams or his ambitions to give my life meaning. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of clarity. A strength I hadn't known was still within me. This betrayal had broken something in me. Yes, but it had also freed me, reminding me that my worth, my value, wasn't tied to anyone else's success. I was my own person, with my own dreams, my own ambitions, and I was ready to live for myself, to build a future that was mine alone. And with that realization came a sense of peace, a quiet resolve that I would never again allow myself to be taken for granted, to be used as someone else's safety net. I was done being the foundation for someone else's life. From now on, I would be my own foundation, standing strong and unshakable, no longer defined by anyone else's needs but my own. In the days that followed my confrontation with Dean and the backlash from his family, I found myself in a place I hadn't been in a long time, alone. But steady. I hadn't realized how much of my life had revolved around his needs. his aspirations, his sense of worth, without the constant swirl of his career highs and lows, the endless negotiations around his finances, and the judgment from his family. I began to feel the space around me open up. There was a stillness, a clarity, and with it, a feeling of peace that I hadn't felt in years. I knew that standing up to him had been the right choice. Even if it had been painful. My life had been derailed by years of compromise and sacrifice, constantly supporting him while setting aside my own needs. Now, for the first time, I could see the path ahead clearly. A future where I was no longer weighed down by his expectations and the emotional toll of holding him up. One morning, I decided to take a small step toward reclaiming my independence. I reached out to my own friends and family, people I had unintentionally distanced myself from during the years of financial and emotional strain with Dean. Their support felt like a lifeline. When I opened up to them about what had been happening, I was met with understanding, warmth, and a validation I didn't know I needed. They reminded me of who I was before all of this, of the strength and stability I'd brought into the relationship in the first place. A close friend of mine who had known me since college sat across from me one evening, looking me squarely in the eye and saying, "You've been the one holding it all together. You've always been enough on your own. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that." Her words struck me deeply. She was right. I had always been self-sufficient, capable, and strong. I'd built a stable life on my own before I'd met Dean, and somewhere, I'd lost sight of that. My support system, people who truly knew me, began filling in the gaps that his family's criticisms had left behind. They helped me rebuild the self-worth that years of giving without receiving had eroded. I realized I had let myself be isolated, subtly pushed away from those who reminded me of my own strength. Those who might have questioned the sacrifices I was making for Dean. Slowly, I started rediscovering what I wanted, separate from anyone else's expectations. I began taking care of things I had set aside for too long, a savings goal I'd put off, a career milestone I'd postponed, and small personal joys that I'd abandoned in the chaos of supporting him. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, a part of the person I had been before I was wrapped up in his narrative. I found myself reaching out to professional connections, reviving projects I'd once been passionate about. I started working on a certification I'd always been interested in but never pursued because I'd felt it was too selfish to focus on something that didn't directly benefit our household. With each task completed, each step forward, I could feel a quiet confidence growing. I was building a life that was mine alone, and it felt like coming home. One evening, as I sorted through our shared finances, taking inventory of everything I'd poured into the marriage, I felt a pang of regret. There was a part of me that mourned the years I'd spent putting his dreams before mine. The countless sacrifices that now felt like pieces of myself I'd given away without any return. But I didn't let myself dwell on it for long. I knew that focusing on the past wouldn't bring me the future I wanted. Instead, I made a promise to myself. From this point forward, I would prioritize my own well-being. I would never again let someone else's needs overshadow my own. Would never let myself be pulled into a situation where my worth was tied to what I could give rather than who I was. My finances, my ambitions, my happiness, these were all things that I deserved to protect, to nurture, to cultivate. Dean, of course, wasn't taking this change easily. He reached out several times, sometimes with anger, sometimes with regret, trying to persuade me that he had only ever had our best interests at heart. He insisted that he'd made mistakes but that he was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. But his words, once so convincing, now felt hollow. I knew that his promises, his remorse, were all part of the same pattern, empty words meant to pull me back into a cycle I could no longer endure. I let his messages go unanswered. I didn't need to explain myself to him anymore. Didn't owe him any more of my time or energy. I had given him years of my life, of my trust, of my unwavering support. Now it was time to give that back to myself. Over the next few weeks, as I settled into this new chapter of my life, I felt lighter. There were moments of sadness. Sure, times when I would remember the good parts of our relationship and feel the sting of loss. But those moments passed, each one a reminder that healing isn't a straight line. That moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It means accepting the past, learning from it, and refusing to let it dictate your future. The final piece of closure came one evening when I sat down and took stock of my life, my goals, and the values I wanted to carry forward. I knew now that my worth wasn't dependent on anyone else's ambitions or validation. I had built a life that was stable, fulfilling, and meaningful on my own. And I was capable of doing it again, stronger and wiser this time. I decided to meet with a financial advisor, someone who could help me untangle the financial obligations I'd taken on for Dean. I knew it would take time to sort out everything, to regain full control of my finances. But I was ready for that challenge. Each step was empowering, a tangible reminder that I was reclaiming my independence, that I was building a future rooted in my own strength. As I closed out that chapter, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This experience had changed me, yes, but it had also shown me my own resilience, my capacity to rise above betrayal and build something new from the ruins. I had trusted someone who didn't value my sacrifices, who saw my generosity as something to exploit rather than cherish. But that was behind me now. I had found my way back to myself, and I was determined to protect this new foundation, to never again lose sight of my own worth. The journey ahead would be challenging, filled with new lessons, new goals, and, perhaps, new relationships. But I was ready. I was no longer afraid of being alone, no longer tied to someone else's dreams or the weight of their expectations. I had stepped out of the shadow of that betrayal, and now I stood fully in my own light, embracing the life that was finally, fully, mine.